Welcome, welcome. Happy Wednesday. We'll see, we've got some folks rolling in here right on time. Appreciate folks joining today. As folks are joining here, we're going to get started in just a minute. And we've got a quick QR code on the screen here in this top right section where we'd love to invite all of you to share a little bit about yourselves, answer a couple quick questions about you, where you're joining from, your purchasing experience before we dive in to get a kind of sense of the group. And I think we'll can also put that link in the chat. This is the Menti kind of polling. Here, I'm going to go ahead and just drop it here. Oh, there you go. Monica's got it. Excited to learn a little bit more about all of you. Thanks so much for joining. For anyone who just joined with that little preamble, we're going to get started in just a minute. We've got the link in the chat where you can answer a couple questions about yourselves, get to know kind of who else is in the room. You can also scan this QR code on the top right of the screen to answer the questions that way. Okay. Folks are continuing to roll in. I'm going to go ahead and start looking at the poll results over here. We can screen share these. Let's see kind of where folks are joining from. Looks like about half the group has already filled this out. Let's see, I'm going to do it in like more of a presentation mode here. Great. Not surprising, we're seeing a lot of California folks leading the room here. We know that we're going to have a lot of fun talking about some California specifics from Angelique's experience in just a little bit. But we've really got some great coverage. Kind of across, we need someone to anchor the middle of the country. My Kansas City folks, that's where I used to work. I'm looking for them. But I see we've got a lot of folks coming from across kind of the Midwest. We've got Northeast, we've got Florida, we've got Texas, and we've got Pacific Northwest too. Very exciting. Appreciate you all for joining us. Wow, that SoCal presence is growing as we see here. SoCal strong. Thanks so much for sharing. There you go. We got a few. Oh, look, we've got Katie from Kansas City in the chat. Okay, great. Thanks for holding down the middle there. Perfect. Let's see kind of which best describes kind of the types of agencies folks are representing here. We've got, again, also not surprising, the higher ed folks coming in strong. We're definitely going to be talking a little bit about what that context looks like. And you'll hear that Angelique also brings experience from the special district component as well as city government. So something for everyone here today. We'll make sure that the tools we share are relevant for all of you. But nice to see a good spread here. And then let's see. Okay, trying to get a good sense of use of Pavilion before to make sure we're giving the basics. Okay, this is a good kind of reminder here. We've got about 40 folks who have never used Pavilion before, so we'll make sure to do a little bit of an overview in just a second before we get into kind of the advanced segment with what it looks like to really use these tools to customize for your compliance needs. But also love to see, there's some folks that have been using Pavilion just this week. So we'll make sure that we're sharing stuff that is relevant across all of you. And then the next question, which I'm very curious about here, is to see the most confusing thing about cooperative purchasing that the group is facing. There are a lot of different things in here, but by far the number one we see is compliance, which will be a hot topic during the discussion today. Let's see, a power of the lead state is an interesting one to talk about. A lot about terms and conditions, laws, how do we actually navigate what the regulations say? I know we'll also talk about that a little bit here. just like contracts, like reviewing them, finding them, staying on top of contract expirations I see in here, comparing pricing. Let's see, I'm trying to read some of this smaller font because there are a lot of things. We do have 1-0, so we've got someone who's figured it out. And so we'll invite you all to share also tips and tricks in the chat here. Great. This is incredibly helpful. Thank you all for sharing here too. Oh, who is allowed to join? Who's allowed to use different co-ops? That's a good one as well. Okay. So we have no shortage of things that we can cover here. We'll try to hit on a lot of them. And also know that this forum exists on a monthly basis. And I'll talk about that in just a second to help kind of navigate these issues together. So again, today the hot topic is going to be compliance, as we discussed. But we are also going to be kind of talking about technology that helps navigate it. And kind of what it looks like to really set up your organization to really take advantage of cooperative purchasing with those compliance issues in mind. So my name is Anne. I am joining from San Francisco, California, although as I already mentioned, I used to work for the city of Kansas City. And my job with Pavilion is to help kind of connect the dots on cooperative purchasing and help make sure procurement leaders have what they need to make purchasing as easy as possible. And one of the ways we do that are through these purchasing power hours. This is, again, a monthly series. Our next one will be in April, the first Wednesday of every month, where we try to bring together procurement leaders so you can hear from innovators in the space, hear how other people are working through similar challenges, access tools that can simplify your work, and just connect with each other, be in community so that you're not alone. Procurement is a team sport. And I think everyone here, I know across the panel is here to help, and I'm sure in the chat too. So please keep as we're having this conversation. Feel free to use the chat regularly. If you have questions that pop up, throw them in there, add in your comments. And this conversation is being recorded. Great question, Diana. So we can share it back with you all after as well. Wonderful. So I am now going to share a little bit about what Pavilion is for that group that has never used us before. I'll give you kind of the brief rundown of kind of how Pavilion works, and then we're going to transition into a fireside chat with Angelic Davis from Mount San Antonio College, who will share a little bit about her team's journey with cooperative purchasing. And then we'll kind of dive into some tools that she set up for her team that you all can set up for yours as well. So when you think about Pavilion, you can think about us really trying to help you find the easiest way to procure what you need. Often that has started with piggyback purchasing. We have the largest database of cooperative contracts from national, state, and local sources, over 100,000 different contracts at your disposal that you can piggyback on, that you can leverage to make a cooperative purchase. You can also use Pavilion to get quotes either from those vendors on a cooperative contract or when you need 3 quotes for an informal bidding process for those under threshold purchases. And then you can also leverage this database to help you draft better scopes of work. So we bring all of the contract documents from all of these sources in one place, easily searchable, totally for free, so that you don't have to start from scratch when you have your next purchasing need. We're going to talk a lot about cooperative purchasing and piggybacking. So I just want to do a quick pause at the top about definitions. When I say cooperative purchasing, I'm most often referring to the practice of like piggybacking on another agency's contract. So this is a legal best practice. It's allowed in all 50 states. We'll dive in a little bit on what that looks like in California. Which it really allows public entities to satisfy competitive bidding requirements for those above threshold purchases by leveraging the competitive process that other agencies have already run. So when you find an existing contract that was from a competitively bid process and it contains language that allows others to use it, you can then kind of piggyback on it or leverage it to issue your own purchase order with that vendor under those same terms and conditions and pricing. This is just a quick visual. We talk about a lot of the time, the big benefit and the reason people are drawn to cooperative purchasing is really the time and administrative time savings from not having to run your own competitive process and leveraging that hard work another agency has already done to really take your purchasing timeline down from months or even years down to days, if not weeks. And so we'll talk a little bit more about some of the benefits and ins and outs of cooperative purchasing in a little bit. But just to keep in mind, this is kind of what we're talking about, that process of leveraging those existing solicitations to make your own purchase faster. And yes, heard and that we can definitely share slides along with the recording. Thank you. Please feel free, keep sending those requests and questions in the chat. Great. So, okay, so a quick overview of kind of what that piggyback process looks like on Pavilion. If you've never used us before, this is kind of the baseline experience. I think we had some New Mexico folks, and so we're signed in as if we were from New Mexico too. It's really as simple as like the second you know what you need to purchase, you can come here and search for what you need. In this case, if you're searching for online auction services, and then you'll see kind of a list of vendors with existing contracts, kind of like, a Google search results page. And these are vendors who have active cooperative contracts that have language that allows you to piggyback on them and were competitively bid. They will also be active, meaning they have not expired, with the idea that, you could move forward with a piggyback purchase on these. But we know you may have a couple more questions before you just, see a vendor and move forward. So we also help you dig in a little deeper. When you click on any one contract, you can see an overview of what's in the scope of work, who the vendor is, even the full contract documents, so that you can kind of do your due diligence, get those example scopes of work, see kind of what were the terms that were agreed to in this contract, confirm they have what you need to see there from a compliance standpoint, and then move forward with getting a quote from the vendor to make sure, confirming their availability and willingness to sell again off of this contract. Or if you're just doing informal bidding, this is another great way of just getting that quote directly. And the big benefit here is when you click on an email button on Pavilion, Pavilion has your back in getting those responses. So it'll open up a message screen. We'll connect you with the best point of contact from that vendor with knowledge of the contract. You are no longer on your own tracking down supplier info through random forms on their websites. We'll help you get in touch. You can add your custom message, add attachments, and get connected with that point of contact directly in your inbox. And our team will follow up if we see they haven't responded in a day or two to make sure that you get the information you need to proceed with that purchase. So hopefully you can see how that process could be a lot simpler than running your own solicitation from scratch. That is kind of the baseline flow that Pavilion enables when it comes to cooperative purchasing, and quoting, and doing market research. Okay, with that, now you've got a lot to think about. You've marinated, you've seen kind of the initial of what Pavilion looks like, heard a little bit about what cooperative purchasing is, but we're going to dig in to much more detail with Angelique. Angelic Davis is the Acting Associate Vice President of Administrative Services with Mount San Antonio College. She brings over 20 years of experience in procurement. I believe most of those have been in public procurement specifically. She, as I mentioned before, has occupied various roles in this space, from the San Bernardino Water Department to the city of Moreno Valley, and most recently with Mount San Antonio College, or Mount SAC, as we may talk about it as we go here. In addition to her roles in her role with Mount SAC, she is a real leader in the public procurement community in California and beyond. She serves on the Foundation for California Community Colleges Professional Development Committee Work Group, is a past chapter chair of the Inland Empire chapter of CAPO, the Public Procurement Officials Association here in California. And we are so excited to have her to share her expertise with us and you all today. Here we go. Angelique, could you start by introducing yourself beyond what I just shared, and adding a little bit about your journey to procurement and what you love about public procurement.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that very generous introduction, Anne. Yes, I have been in the public procurement space for approximately 20 years now, working in various agencies. So I've had the opportunity to understand some of the opportunities and challenges that we face as public procurement officials. And finding cooperative agreements or utilizing cooperative agreements is one of the greatest challenges that I have seen some of my counterparts struggle with, right? As far as introducing myself further, as you said, I'm currently the acting associate vice president of administrative services here at Mount San Antonio College, but I also serve as the director of purchasing, and that has not quite gone away. I'm still continuing that role as well. I have been utilizing Pavilion for approximately, I would say I've been utilizing Pavilion for about 5 years since the pandemic started. Actually, a little before the pandemic started. Pavilion changed its name, but we were using Pavilion even before the pandemic. So we've gotten very familiar with utilizing Pavilion to assist us, and I've seen the growth that Pavilion has had over the years. So I'm very excited to be able to speak to our procurement community about the benefits of utilizing Pavilion. As far as what I love about procurement, there's so many things I love. I'm really a procurement nerd, and I could go on, but I'll go ahead and narrow it down to just a few things. One thing that I really love about procurement is we have such an opportunity to make an impact, have an impact on our community surrounding us. We have the ability to impact small businesses, large businesses, businesses of all types. We just have this huge ability to make a difference with all of those that we work with. I also love about procurement that we are such a collaborative group. We help one another. I've never seen another industry that has no issue with sharing. And that really speaks to the reason why we're so eager to utilize cooperative agreements and to assist each other to make sure that we have, all the tools that we need to be successful. And you don't see that in every industry. It is something that I truly treasure, and I'm sure that many of you guys treasure, that we are able to contact people at other agencies, maybe neighboring agencies, neighboring cities. In our case here in California Community College, we have a great network of all of the colleges here in California. And we have our college vice teams who supports us at the state level. And it's just amazing to have that support and assistance. So one of the greatest things about working in procurement.
I love that. It's especially relevant as we talk about cooperative purchasing. No wonder that's a natural fit in a
Mhm.
friend's workflow in public procurement, given your comments too about how collaborative the experience has been. I know that's certainly been my experience as well. So, with that in mind, we talked a little bit about the time savings from leveraging an existing cooperative agreement, but I'm curious to learn more from you, Angelique, about why have you and your team at Mount SAC really embraced cooperative purchasing? Why has that become a core part of your team's purchasing work?
Definitely is helpful for us to be able, as you mentioned, to save time and get those procurements done, brought to our team, to our those that we serve as quickly as possible. Of course, that's one of our missions, is to be able to provide services and supplies, materials, equipment, whatever it is that our stakeholders are requesting as quickly as possible. We want to make sure that we're able to serve our campus needs as quickly as we possibly can, but we want to do everything within the law, within all of the requirements that we're required to follow. So utilizing cooperative purchasing helps us to achieve both of those goals, right? It allows us to cut that time, but it also allows us an opportunity, specifically when we have all of the information, which Pavilion does a great job of giving us that access to the information that we need to confirm that these agreements are they do meet our requirements, that they are legal for us to use, which is something that I think that a lot of my counterparts have expressed in previous conversations. Is, there's sometimes confusion as to what what agreements we are able to leverage, what agreements are we able to utilize. So being able to clearly look at information and identify if it does meet all of our requirements is very, very helpful. Another reason why we love to utilize cooperative agreements is because when we utilize cooperative agreements, there are often terms and conditions. You kind of pointed it out when you were giving a tour of Pavilion. Sometimes there are things in the scope of work we may not have thought of. So it helps to cover those gaps. So we like to be able to look and see what other agencies are doing in an innovative manner that maybe we haven't thought of. So even if we just take those terms and conditions and we end up rolling them into our own bid in the future, our own RFP, it's a great resource for us to see, additional things that we should be considering.
Absolutely. I know we often recommend folks just like always check if a cooperative agreement is available for exactly that reason, right? At best, it can save you from running your own solicitation when you didn't need to. But also, it can just help you identify things you may have missed if you were drafting a scope of work without leveraging what other folks have already put out there in the world. So that makes a lot of great sense. I'm curious, as you're talking about navigating the compliance requirements of these what do you look for at Mount SAC when you need to confirm that an agreement is something that you all can use?
So this is really interesting because prior to coming to the community college space, there were different things that I was looking for. So I think that it's really important to identify that depending on where you're working, what codes are applicable to you, you really need to have that level of familiarity and understand the legal framework that goes into the codes that authorize you to procure cooperatively. So here in California at community colleges, there are several codes that provide us authority to utilize either piggybackable or cooperative agreements. And we have a unique situation where in education, both higher education and in the K through 12 space of education as well, we are able to piggyback on agreements for material, supplies, and equipment um, but however, there is some special consideration we have to give when we are procuring anything that involves labor or installation. So specifically, we have a code that allows us to piggyback on that material, supplies, and equipment pretty easily, and we're able to identify, as long as it meets the basic requirements that are required by code, such as, the advertising requirement and um, that we have actually a competitive process that has taken place, right? Those are very basic requirements that have to be met. But if we want to procure something that includes services or some type of installation, some type of labor, we have to do a consideration of how much of that what that component is of labor or services. And that's something that I think sometimes will discourage people from going down the cooperative route because there's that complexity that they may not be aware of. But I think that if you have very clear guidance as to what that requirement is and which codes allow you to utilize certain contracts that you can access that would allow you to use those agreements that include services and installation, then that gives you makes you feel more confident and you're able to know exactly which contracts you can leverage. Particularly in California, we utilize at community colleges, we utilize our Foundation of California Community Colleges agreements. We prioritize those. Those are the agreements that already include, and I'm not sure if everyone here knows, I mentioned it briefly, we have a contracting arm at the state level, and that's the College Wise Group, Foundation of California Community College Wise Group. So they procure on our behalf for one or more community colleges throughout the state. And like I said, they're great partners, great support, great resource for us. We're very, very fortunate to have them. And I'm sure not every state has that, may not have that set up. But having that ability to leverage those contracts, knowing that they specifically were made, knowing what California community colleges face, the requirements that we have, of course, is the very best resource we can have. So that would be the first source of a cooperative agreement that we would go to. Then from there, we are also through an initiative in California, able to access other higher education institutions' cooperative agreements. So you have the University of California agreements, and you have California State University, who also has cooperative agreements that you can utilize through the chancellor's office. So if we don't have a agreement through the Foundation of California Community Colleges we can leverage, then we would then look for agreements through UC and CSU. Those, and the interesting part is all three of those types of agreements that I just described, you do not have to worry about that component of labor, installation, and services that you are not able to necessarily use a cooperative agreement for other or other cooperative agreements for. So it's very, very fortunate for us that we are able to utilize these groups of agreements and include that component. I think that just understanding all of those codes, and there's various codes, right? There are so many codes, and I can rattle off a lot of codes. Fortunately, I've been in this industry long enough that I've memorized them, and I know not everybody has, but having that information to be resourceful for you and handy is very, very beneficial. And Anne, I know you have a sheet where we have a cheat sheet that we utilize. If you don't have something like this, then I would recommend, getting a hold of all of the codes that are applicable to you and, creating some type of cheat sheet like this. I know we have many California community colleges who have joined us today. Hopefully you guys have seen this. If not, this will be shared today after today's meeting.
Yes. There were a lot of golden nuggets in what you just shared. I feel like for me, what I heard loud and clear too was really just I know no one wants to spend a lot of time memorizing code, and you don't have to. There's a lot of resources out there, I think, especially in the procurement world. This is a great example in California of one that folks have created for California community colleges. Pavilion has also worked to translate this into guidance on the platform that we can share in just a little bit. And we're happy to work with others outside of California and beyond in figuring out how to translate what you're seeing in those regulations, the state codes, into kind of plain guidance that you all can implement and share across your organization. Because I think it's one thing for a purchasing team to spend a lot of time reading through regulations, internalizing them, interpreting them. But we know when you're ready to share and try to empower your departments or other colleagues, they may not all have the same patience or experience reading through those same regulations. So figuring out how to develop resources like this and give folks tools that allow them to self-serve and kind of navigate through those code changes feels like a real great tip from, I know, Angelique's experience there. I also heard, I think, a lot that is really interesting around thinking about what are the easiest categories of things to purchase off a cooperative agreement. And some of that may be due to regulations in your state, like Angelique was mentioning. But oftentimes we hear too, like thinking about what are the easiest things to piggyback, because I know every other organization like mine must be purchasing the same thing, whether that's office supplies or tires. Thinking about, is this something that is really unique to me? Or is this something that everyone in my seat is going to be purchasing, is often an easy way to think about where to first start if you're early in your journey of bringing cooperative purchasing to your organization. And then also hearing from Angelique too about the different types of contract sources that can make it easier for you to work with. So in the case of higher ed in California, it's easier to piggyback on other higher ed contracts, and those contracts from the Foundation for California Community Colleges that were designed specifically for higher ed to use, which is a really great tip too. So those were three things I wanted to make sure to kind of pull out for the group that I was hearing there around helping other folks navigate code by translating it into helpful guidance like what we see on the screen here. Thinking about the easiest categories of things to purchase off co-op, and then digging into the easiest contracts, which often tend to be ones that are from entities like yours. And we'll show you how to simplify kind of all of those, some tools that can enable you to do that in just a second. I'm going to go back to this screen. I'm curious, Angelique, we got a question, I think, in the chat too, and knowing your experience from outside of community colleges in California doing procurement, I know that like labor and installation kind of requirements and the different contract sources you pay attention to are a little different in your current seat. Are there any other key differences or tips that you would have for folks from, I think we saw from special districts or from cities, from other entities outside of higher ed from your experience?
Absolutely. I would say, one, you need to check if you have a municipal code. If you work for a city, check your municipal code requirements as well. Ensure that you have a very strong understanding of what your, not only the state codes say, but what your own entities codes are. In addition, I would ensure that you are leveraging your other special districts around you, and identifying how do they handle things? What is it that they do? Um, if there is we have here in California Association of Public Procurement Officials, or CAPO. If in your state you have a resource like that, as well as NIGP, definitely get connected with those groups. You're able to share, like we talked about, and collaborate, share ideas, collaborate, and identify what those best practices are that others are following. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. I always say, I have no shame, I beg, borrow, and steal. And I, I love that here in procurement, that is something that seems to be very well embraced. And we don't have to do it all on our own. We don't have to figure everything out, all by ourselves. There are others who have done it before us, and there are others who are doing it currently. So we can engage with them and identify, different things that they may be doing. And you may, and I have done this at some of the agencies I've worked at, you may be bringing forth new ideas and identifying areas that you can strengthen in your own agency, even if it's not written into your municipal code or it's not clearly stated, which I have found, is often the case. You may not have very clear guidance in your own codes. And the public contract code can be very broad. So in those cases, I say collaborate with others and identify, ways of doing things that you feel aligned with and you think that would be helpful for your agency.
Absolutely. I know it feels like procurement teams are often there to fill the gap between what is written in code and reality and making those things work together. And so love that advice of collaborating with your peers to create kind of the easiest path forward to make both of those things come together. I'm curious in that process. I know that sounds, too, like a lot of change management when you're bringing about new process and you're bringing about new ways of purchasing. I'm curious from your experience, Angelique, what kind of pushback or challenges have you run into when you were trying to get folks to embrace kind of new processes or just embrace cooperative purchasing more generally?
Oh, this is an ongoing because we're constantly evolving, right? There's so many things that are changing. Just, technology wise, just think about, just maybe a year or two ago, a lot of people were unfamiliar with AI, didn't know what ChatGPT was, never heard of it. There are all kinds of developments that are occurring from day to day, and we are also continuing to evolve here in our agencies. So some of the things that we do are, one, we have to be communicative, right? We try our best to alert everyone as much as we can of the changes that we anticipate making, what it is that we're going to be doing, how it's going to affect them, and how it's going to benefit them. You really have to sell the changes that you're making and show them what's in it for them, what's the benefit, how it's going to save them time, how it's going to assist them when you implement these changes. Because I know that, it may seem like we as procurement folks have to put up a lot of hurdles. Sometimes we have to identify for people all of the requirements that they should be meeting, but we also don't want to leave out how the things that we are bringing forth and introducing can also be, more efficient, how they are going to make our agency stronger as far as regulatory compliance and ensuring that we are making sure that everyone, because I always say our jobs are to protect everyone in the organization from the very top, whether that in our case, it's our board of trustees, and our president, all the way down to the end user who is making a request for a purchase. We want to make sure everyone is protected throughout the organization. So just ensure that you are giving that guidance to your end users and showing them the easiest path for them to get there.
Love that. I know communicating the value to them upfront and making it as easy as possible to follow that process makes a lot of sense, which is probably a good transition into talking to you about how you have used Pavilion to make it easier for folks to follow, your cooperative purchasing policy and journey. Could you share kind of just a high level overview, and then I can dive deeper and show folks what it looks like?
Absolutely. So as I was mentioning earlier, we have very specific rules that we need to follow here in California based on the public contracting codes that are applicable to us. There are certain types of contracts that we can purchase that include things like services. And then there are, contracts that we may be able to leverage as well, that maybe from other organizations, whether they're consortiums like, the Omnias, the Sourcewells out there, if they are other entities, agreements that we can piggyback on. There are various contracts that we may be able to utilize, but we want to prioritize those that we know meet all of our requirements. So in our case, we have set up a view for our end users so that they automatically, when they search, if they go online to Pavilion, whether that is our internal purchasing department users or our end users, our stakeholders here on campus, that are requesters. If they go onto Pavilion and they search for a contract, they're going to be directed to a Mount San Antonio specific page. And when they do conduct that search, the results are going to show those contracts that are usable by us. All of the foundation contracts, all of the University of California contracts, all of the CSU agreements will be prioritized if they exist there in Pavilion. We also have the ability to access Department of General Services for the state of California and CMAS agreements. So there will also be those contracts shown in the results. And then what I love is, those are prioritized. They're at the very top, and then Pavilion will clearly identify for you. We also found these additional agreements that do not necessarily fall into any of these categories, but we have the opportunity to take a look at them, and then we can identify maybe for this type of purchase, we can access this agreement that may be, from another agency like Orange County has a lot, and they're very close to us. They have a lot of cooperative agreements, and sometimes I am able to leverage those. So I love that our results are very filtered and clear for those who are doing searches. And that goes back to making it easy for your end users, making it easy for your staff to understand what they can and cannot access.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to jump in and share exactly what that has looked like in Pavilion. So now that you've voiced over it, folks can see directly as well. Let's see if I can make that happen. This will be my challenge for the day, if I can pull it up. Great. So you should be seeing the Pavilion homepage now. And I want to also just remind folks too, I'm going to show folks what this looks like for the next few minutes. But while I'm doing that, please feel free to keep adding questions in the chat. We're going to bring your questions for Angelique back to for the discussion to close us out at the end too. So this is the Pavilion homepage. If you've never been here before, it's withpavilion.com. And I could search for, whatever product, service, brand name I'm looking for. So I'm just going to search for, let's say, HVAC equipment off the jump. And you're going to see this main Pavilion home screen right now. Again, that kind of Google search results just for vendors with contracts you can use. There's different filters that you can apply to narrow down based off of contract source, the location of the supplier, when the contract's expiring, even if there are diversity certifications that you care about that you want to see show up. But right now, this is what you're able to see when you're not logged in, when nothing's customized for your agency. So if I go to view a contract, we're going to ask you to log in. We do this to make sure that anyone who's signing in is associated with the right entity. Like for Mount SAC, we want to make sure that if a department user found a contract, they're seeing the experience that Angelique set up. We also do this to make sure that people are actually from government agencies before they're reaching out to suppliers for quotes. So it's just as simple as entering in kind of your email, doing it right here so you can see how fast it is. We'll detect what your agency is right there, set your password, you're good to go. We also have single sign-on with Google and Microsoft if that's easier. Since I already have an account, I'm just going to hit login, enter in my information, and I'm going to now see kind of what the experience looks like for someone who is logged in from Mount San Antonio College. So off the jump, we're seeing the contract page, but immediately we have now this banner at the top that says, unsure if you can use a contract, learn more about Mount San Antonio College's cooperative purchasing policy here. So this is exactly what Angelique was just talking about, of translating those codes into easy to use guidance that's at her department's fingertips when they're in the process of reviewing a contract. They're seeing this contract right here. They could look through the contract documents, but maybe they're not sure what to be looking for. They can click, and this is the Mount San Antonio College kind of custom page, where you can see kind of their purchasing thresholds for different categories of purchases. So they know when they need multiple quotes or when it's above threshold, that piggybacking may be something to consider. And I think really importantly is really these kind of simple steps to take after finding a contract. So when they're looking at different contracts, knowing, okay, you are going to need a written quote. You're going to need to confirm that the price that is quoted is equal to or lower than the pricing on the original contract. And you're going to need the documentation and quick reminders of what documentation you'll need to submit right here, as well as just a link back to the broader purchasing website and kind of knowing who to connect with for more support afterwards to really give departments this kind of simple, connected experience when they're trying to figure out, is this an easy way for me to purchase? And then, so maybe, they've internalized that. I could go back and search for HVAC equipment again. And now you're going to see what a couple those different things where this is now really customized for Mount SAC when you are searching as you're logged in. So first up, just Mount SAC actually already has a contract for HVAC equipment. And because Angelique and her team use a contract management system that we were able to connect with, and now we're able to say, hey, actually stop what you're doing. You don't actually even need to create your own agreement. You already have a contract available right here. So that's going to always pop up first when there's a relevant contract that MONSAC already has for her department users to know about. But let's say that, they didn't, that contract didn't exist or it didn't fit the need for that user. We also are automatically now applying this filter that says only show approved sources first. So this is what Angelique was talking about with showing kind of those core contract sources that are easier for her team to approve. So this really increases the likelihood that when a department's coming to her team with a contract, it's much more likely to be something that her team can say yes to. And you can see what that looks like specifically here too. If this is something, so we say sources approved by my entity, you can click manage those sources, or if you don't have that set up already and would like to, you could just click on your name when you're logged in. You click on account preferences when you click on, and then click on contract sources. And this is where we see the set of contract sources that Angelique has said, these are the best ones that we want to see showing up first. As she mentioned, those higher ed contracts that were built directly for California community colleges, as well as state of California, the UC system, and then other university and community college sources will show up first. It's really simple to add and remove contracts sources here. So I'll just show you live. Like we'll use, so let's say, for this example, you can remove the FCCC contracts. And then if I wanted to add them back, it's as simple as coming up to the top here and saying, okay, I actually want to add Foundation for California Community Colleges to my pre-approved list. And now it will appear first in search results for her teammates. Angelique, was there anything about the experience here that I just showed or that I forgot to show that you think is worth highlighting for the group?
No, I think that you did a really good job of explaining what the experience looks like for us on our end. I did see a question in the chat though that I wanted to address, and that is what procurement system we're using. You
Oh, yeah.
mentioned it as well as you were navigating the site. We do have OpenGov. That's what we utilize for our solicitation management as well as our contract management. And any of the agreements that we input into OpenGov, we have the ability to share that information with Pavilion, and Pavilion is incorporated into OpenGov, where we can also do a contract search in OpenGov for any cooperative agreements. So I really love the functionality of how they work together. And it's been very helpful for us to be able to have that information accessible, because exactly as you showed, if we go to search for a HVAC contract, you will see very quickly that we have our own. So that helps our internal end users, as well as our internal staff here in purchasing. Maybe they weren't the buyer or the procurement specialist who put that contract in place, but it would give them that reminder, hey, you have your own, and vice versa. We also can do that search within OpenGov if we see that we don't have a contract for something, and it will take us on into the Pavilion platform.
Perfect call out. And for anyone here who uses OpenGov, we can set it up just like that. If you'd use other systems, even if you just use a spreadsheet, we can work with that to make sure that you get this experience too. So if you're interested in that, please let us know. We work with any type of platform, and OpenGov's a great example where it's really simple to do so. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. I've been seeing some messages come in the chat. Let's see, Monica, could you help us? Are there what kind of questions that you saw that would be good for the group to answer here?
Yeah, absolutely. We got a question asking, what is the largest mistake you have witnessed in cooperative purchasing? The asker knows that there are several pitfalls, but what would you say is the one to be on the lookout for?
I'm going to share a little dirty laundry. We Before I started here at Mount San Antonio College, we had a agreement put in place specifically for elevators. There it's for elevator maintenance, and that obviously it involves service. You have someone coming on campus, conducting preventative maintenance checks and services. And as I mentioned earlier, there are strict guidelines in California specific to community colleges, specific to education, and there are ed codes and public contract codes that state how we can utilize different cooperative agreements. We are not able to utilize cooperative agreements for services unless there is a consideration of whether the labor or services is incidental to the contract. Incidental is typically state law, 10% or less. And then each agency has some authority to determine what they consider incidental as long as it doesn't exceed 50%. And that's based on case law that has been passed years ago. Stilgard versus Jansen is the case. So anyway, with that in mind, contracting for that service should have only been done with a Foundation of California Community Colleges agreement, a UC agreement, or a CSU agreement. However, I think that was unknown at the time when that contract was put in place, and I believe it was a Sourcewell agreement. No, I'm sorry, it was an E&I. E&I agreement was utilized, and we had that agreement in place for 4 years before, I found that actually that agreement should not have been put in place. And so I had to inform our procurement specialist, hey, that's not an agreement that we typically can use. We should not be able to use for those types of services. So we've had to work through that with the vendor, who also is very confused. So be aware that the vendors that you work with, they may tell you that you can use certain agreements and they may not be aware. They are not necessarily the experts on, they have a understanding of how cooperative purchasing works in general, but they are not necessarily experts on your entity's requirements or your state law requirements, or, in our case, ed code requirements as well. So those are the types of pitfalls that you want to be on the lookout for, and make sure that you and your team are familiar with how you are able to contract those things.
That's a great call out. I know I've experienced that firsthand too, where suppliers are a great resource, and then at times can also create confusion depending on the process. I think that's another example where having easy to follow resources that are the source of truth for your organization feels really important. But I also know it can be intimidating if that doesn't exist yet. So hopefully we can share some of the examples from today to help you get started too. Let's see. I know Monica's flagging another question, I think, in the chat. Oh, this is a great one. Since I know it's part of the Mount SAC checklist to confirm the pricing that you're getting quoted from the vendor is equal to or lower than the original contract. How do you do that?
So we actually have to do a lot of footwork sometimes to get that information, but we look at the contract, if the pricing is included, and as many of you know, who have looked at cooperative agreements, you have different cases depending on what type of agreement you're utilizing. Sometimes the pricing is directly accessible in the agreement documents. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you'll have a document that says, please contact whoever it may be, it may be Sourcewell, it may be Omnia for pricing, or, whomever that contract is with. So we actually do a request for the pricing, and we confirm that the proposal that we received from the vendor with first they have to include the agreement number, the name of the cooperative agreement that we're utilizing, the agreement number, the term dates for that cooperative agreement on the proposal. And we request that pricing as well from the cooperative, and we compare those. And that is also a practice that wasn't always done at Mount SAC, but we have since incorporated that. And it's not always easy. I will admit that there are times where it's a little difficult to obtain that information. Particularly CMAS agreements have been a little challenging. Those are, if you're not from California, it's a California Multiple Award Schedule, and they are agreements that are put in place by the state of California. And although there's a database for them, that database is a little challenging to navigate. So there are times where we reach directly out to the state, and they have a department that specifically works on CMAS agreements, the Department of General Services, and we will ask them to provide us with a copy of the agreement and the pricing, and we'll do that comparison.
That's a great call out too. I wanted to share my screen briefly to also show how we can make that a little simpler to support that workflow on Pavilion. If I can getting the right screen to show up, that will be the bigger challenge. So this is where on Pavilion, if you find a contract, we showed you, how you can reach out to a vendor or a supplier to get a quote. We also have a place where you can contact the contract admin. So if this is something that you are working through when you're on this main page here, you can see the documents will always have this button that says email the contract admin. Where it'll show your information, where the email will come from, type in whatever message. You can even copy the supplier if you want to, say anyone with knowledge of this contract can answer it, or just reach out to the contract admin. And that's another place where Pavilion will help you kind of do that work of tracking down answers and getting you in touch as you need, because we know sometimes it does require multiple checks between the supplier and the contract admin for sure. And then I saw one person also in the chat asked about, can you include scopes of work in your request for quotes? And yes, this is newer. So if you've been on Pavilion for a while, is pre-pandemic, like Angelique, you may not have seen this is a late feature where you can now upload attachments to your messages. We'll have to have verified your account. So if this button is not coming up for you, you can just reach out to us and we'll make sure to verify your account if that's not showing up. But this allows you to you can upload attachments. It'll pull up, any of your documents on your computer. I believe there is a file limit size, so super large files you might need to break up. But this will allow you to directly request quotes for your scope that way. Let's see, we've got a couple more minutes. Okay, it's not showing up for Stephanie yet, so we might just need to verify your email. We'll follow up with you afterwards to make sure that's happening. If anyone else isn't seeing that either, please let us know. You can always email our team and we'll make sure that happens for you. Let's see, Monica, have you seen some other questions we should be tackling here? I know some other messages have come through.
I see a question here in the chat that I can address. It says, how do you handle cooperatives that may be set to expire prior to your contract ending? Do you find vendors willing eager to get contracts renewed, negotiated, and get that information back to you. So I think each agency may handle this a little differently. Our standard is that the agreement needs to be active. It needs to be current at the time that we contract for it. It may expire during the term that we're going to utilize it, but as long as it's active at the time that we are looking for the solicitation, then we'll utilize it. We do consider it though, when that agreement is going to expire, and we may not go for a 3-year term or a 5-year term. We may just choose to do it for a 1 or 2-year term, just depending on how that is going to impact us here at our agency.
Great answer. And I see Chelsea has also jumped in the chat. With her experience from her agency, finding vendors are pretty eager because it allows them to continue the work, but also definitely something you have to monitor. I will say if the way Pavilion tries to help out with this a little bit is we will also send you expiration notifications 6 months before we see a contract is about to expire. If you have connected your contract data with Pavilion, we'll send you expiration reminders for those. You can also track which contracts you've piggybacked on, and we send you expiration reminders for those to help you stay on top of it, give you a little notice in that system. And I see Missy asked a question about, is it hard to integrate a contract management system? I think from the Pavilion, if it's talking about integrating your contracts with Pavilion, we'll do all the heavy lifting for you. You just basically have to tell us where the contracts are, and we'll get them. And for Angelique, I think it was pretty much the click of a button. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's already an existing partnership between Open Gov and Pavilion, so I really didn't have to do anything. Just, turn on the feature.
Yeah. And if you have a different system, it should be similarly pretty easy. You just tell us where it is, and we'll figure it out. So happy to talk one-on-one after that to kind of set up any of these customizations like that. I want to double check here. I think I did see one question too about kind of why just a reminder about like why some contracts and not the others. I think one big one we've talked about today is just there are certain contracts that per state code, California community colleges have an easier time using because they were designed for California community colleges. And I think in the elevator maintenance example, that was one of those where it fell into a category of purchases where if you needed it to have specific contract language or be from a certain source per the state code. Is that right, Angelique?
Yeah, so I was trying to not get too technical.
I know.
There are public contract codes, public contract code 20651, 20652. They authorize us to purchase or utilize contracts that have been entered into by other public agencies or cooperative agreements for supplies, equipment, and materials. They do not list services in their definition. Therefore, the interpretation is that you cannot use those codes or contracts associated with services you can't purchase those off of a cooperative. However, there were additional codes that were developed, Public Contract Code 20661, which allows us to utilize other higher education contracts, specifically Foundation of California Community College contracts. And that definition includes supplies, equipment, materials, and services. So that's the authority that allows us to utilize cooperative agreements that involve services with no consideration of whether the work is incidental, that 10% to 50% range that I was describing earlier. So obviously we would prefer to utilize a Foundation of California Community Colleges agreement if something involves services, because there's no consideration as to the amount of services that we're contracting for that we have to include in our analysis. So I hope that helps clarify why we can utilize certain agreements for, we can utilize certain contracts for certain types of services.
And I know that's like real specific for California community colleges. I know other states, like the Washington Community Colleges has its own set of kind of customizations and custom rules that it must follow. But I will say those seem to be some of the more restrictive approaches. Like if you can hack it as a community college on cooperative purchasing, like anybody can, and is often where I see it. We only have 1 minute left, so I'm gonna want to invite everybody to kind of share based off the conversation today. What's one takeaway that you have had from this conversation that felt most relevant to your work or something you want to take back to your team? Please jump in the chat and share.
And I just shared some of those codes that I was referencing. If you are in California, you can look those codes up. You know, those are just the code numbers.
Perfect. Cooperatives take work. Hopefully we also can help make it that work a little easier too. Any other tips or takeaways? Collaborative help is available. Price confirmation. I'm glad things felt informative. Some shared struggles among the group. Please keep them coming. I think if you're feeling that interest in customizing things to make things easier, like we showed for Mount SAC, here's one more QR code where you can schedule a meeting to get that all set up, whether that's connecting your contracts, adding in your purchasing guidance, or setting those pre-approved contract sources, or all of the above. And we hope you'll join us for the same kind of conversation in April. We'll be focusing on empowering departments. So kind of a continuation in many ways of some of the topics we talked about here today. And again, a lot of that is hoping to just continue to create community space among procurement leaders who are working through similar challenges. So want to say a big thank you to all of you for joining. Again, thank you, Angelique, for sharing your time and expertise with us. I know, did you have any plugs you wanted to make for the group besides these resources? No.
Yeah, I just wanted to share for our California community colleges that are present. If you are not aware, we are going to be doing a cooperative purchasing series, training series. It will kick off at our purchasing conference in San Diego next month. And then we will have a series that will follow that will be 4 sessions long to help further understand how to navigate cooperative procurement. So I hope you all can register and attend, and the Foundation of California Community Colleges will be sending out more information so that you can attend those webinars.
Fabulous. So many great resources shared today. Thank you again, Angelique. And thank you all for joining. I'll hang out for just an extra minute, but I know we're already a little over time, so hope everybody has a great rest of their day, and that we can stay in touch soon. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you, guys. Hey, Anne. I didn't know if you wanted to debrief or anything.
I think we're all still here. Let me see. I'll give you a quick message after this.